I'm Ashley Collins, author of the Ankler's Dealmakers newsletter, coming to you with a special bonus episode of the Ankler podcast. In October, I hosted a conversation about artists, audiences, and artificial intelligence at the Montclair Film Festival, where the Ankler was a signature partner. Generative AI is a topic on everyone's lips in Hollywood, where it stands to impact every aspect of the entertainment business, and where it's already stirring up a lot of curiosity, creativity, and fear. I talked about the tech with a panel of experts: law professor and tech attorney James Grimmelman, investor and advisor Greg Kahn, film executive Eric Kohn, and filmmaker Michaela Ternaski-Holland, whose short film Thank You Mom, which was made in part with Sora AI, screened at the Tribeca Film Festival. We kicked off our event with a look at Michaela's film, and from there we delved into all the ways AI is changing entertainment, the tech's creative possibilities and limitations, the mega deals it's driving, the guardrails for Hollywood, and the legal implications for artists and industries. Here's our conversation in front of a live Montclair Film Festival audience.
So as you may have guessed, given the topic of today's panel, this film is one of the first shorts to be created and premiere using OpenAI's Sora. And it was directed by Emmy-winning director Michaela Ternaski-Holland, who is one of our panelists today. Come on up, Michaela. We are also joined by James Grimmelman, who is a Cornell Law School professor and director of the Cornell Tech Research Lab in Applied Law and Technology. Greg Kahn, who is not only on the board of your very own Montclair Film, but is also CEO of DK Digital Ventures and an investor and advisor in emerging tech, media, and advertising. And last but not least, Eric Kohn, who is a former journalist and now head of film strategy and development for Edgelord. Thank you all so much. Just to get us started off, let's go through the line. We'll start with Eric about how AI fits in your job and a little bit of what you do.
Sure. Edgelord was founded about a year ago. It was co-founded by Harmony Korine, who's probably best known for Spring Breakers. He wrote Kids. He's incredibly successful in the commercial and fashion space as well. And we are a design collective that consolidates that experience into a company that leverages technology to make movies, but also to do fashion, art, design work, VFX work. We're sort of a full-purpose 360 studio. We're very AI forward in the sense that we use everything from Stable Diffusion to Midjourney to 11 labs in the work that we do. So we have game developers working alongside technologists and filmmakers, and we're trying to create an environment in which this kind of tech can speed up the process of getting things made. So that's kind of where we're coming from.
All right, Greg.
Hi, everyone. I'm Greg Kahn. I'm an investor and an advisor in the intersection of technology, media, and advertising. I started my career in film and television way back when, but the last 15 years I've been working in technology and investing. So now I bring all my worlds together. And so I invest and I advise, but I also bring people together around the topic of AI.
James?
So I'm not directly in the entertainment industry. I'm in academia, which means that on the two halves of my job, on my research half, I try to understand where AI is going and how the legal system is going to adapt to it. And on the teaching side, I now have students who will use generative AI to help complete their assignments. So part of what I'm trying to do is explore with them how, as professionals, they can use it safely, effectively, and responsibly.
And Michaela, part of the reason why I wanted to come to you last is because I want you to talk about your work in general, but also tell the audience how Thank You Mom came to be.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today. And it's an honor to be on this panel with incredible panelists and an incredible moderator. So when Tribeca approached me and said, we are partnering with OpenAI Sora, and we think you as an alumni would be a great fit for our program, would you like to create a short film using a technology that only a very handful of people get access to? The first thing I said was, well, how do I make this feel human? How do I make sure this unlocks a conversation? How do I make sure I don't make people distrust AI? How do I make sure I create a story that feels like you can fall into, feels like you can get immersed inside of? And so I actually was onboarded to the Sora platform on the 30th anniversary of my father's death. And I was like, well, that seems like the story I need to tell. And I went back in time and looked at some of my old journals and thought about myself as a young girl and was really thinking about, can I create a story that is in conversation with hand-drawn animation? So I worked with actual animators on some of the overlays that you saw. I worked with a score composer to score compose the music you heard, but we knew we needed to use Sora as a collaborator in the process. And so that was really the start of that journey, and what you saw was the end product.
Very cool. And one of the things with any new technology is there's an inherent fear in the unknown, and AI is a bit of a sore spot in Hollywood. There's a lot of fear around what it's going to mean for jobs and what it's going to mean for using existing art to create new things. And I thought a good place to jump off would be to sort of address some of those fears and maybe some of the misconceptions about what generative AI is and isn't. So what do you think is a misconception about Gen AI that is causing people in the entertainment industry to be wary of it?
I think a lot of people aren't using it when they become so scared. And when you don't understand something, it makes you recoil and start to imagine things that aren't actually there. The more that you see AI in action, the more you understand that if it was completely automated, it would be pretty bad. The results are just not there. And sure, we could speculate about getting to the point where you can just push a button and a movie will come out and then we'll have no more filmmakers. But the reality is that while we could talk about guardrails and so forth, we're not at the point where this technology is replacing artists. In fact, we're at a point where this technology needs artists to create something substantial with it. And we also, I think, overgeneralize about AI. AI is not one thing. It's not a monolithic category. It's like all this giant thing called AI is replacing the industry. Are we talking about images? Are we talking about narrative? Are we talking about sound? Generative technology has been with us for a very long time. And because of ChatGPT being so popularized in the media over the past year and change, I think we're much more cognizant of it. But these are all different developments that have been happening in piecemeal, and a lot of the adaptation has already happened in the industry, even without realizing it. You have AI on your phone right now, and you probably have for a long time, and you just don't think about it. So I think a lot of the fear is just coming from a lack of understanding.
I'll jump in to say that I think that production costs are incredibly expensive, particularly for franchise films. And so there are elements that are going to be introduced to make it more efficient, make it easier for creators to get access to tools, and just like they did with other technologies, with the mobile phone. But it's not going to replace the industry. It's going to enhance it.
I think that it's easy to look at the remarkable quality of some of the outputs and think that, well, that just makes it really easy for anybody to realize a specific artistic vision. And it doesn't really. AI is still much more of an intern than a god, to use the terminology that Ethan Mollick came up with. It's a really diligent intern that can make a lot of things, but it's very hard to predict what you're going to get back. If you ask it for a rainbow unicorn, it could be photorealistic, it could be a flat cartoon, it could be all kinds of different things. It takes actually a lot of creative work in order to have an artistic vision to realize it using AI. So it doesn't just mean that an executive can say, order me a sitcom, tell the AI to do it. Instead, there are still going to have to be lots of people doing creative work to bring something to vision. It's just a different way of bringing something into existence.
Absolutely. And I think there are opportunities for artists and creatives who are willing to play with these technologies to be able to explore ideas that they haven't been able to explore before, whether that's in a much faster timeline because they can do a lot more with just the power of one person, right? You have a powerful intern who has infinite computing knowledge, but you still need somebody with the sensibility and the curation And the other part of it is, where's the audience for something like this? Because I've seen a lot of really cool AI pieces of content on social media. And the reality is we also have trained our audiences to love and care about film. So my goal would be like, if we're going to make AI content and we are going to market it at the same dollar level as like a hit Hollywood film, my hope is that the quality is still there for our audience to enjoy.
So this is mostly Michaela and Eric. You're using this tech. I've heard from some people that there are a lot of people who are curious about using AI, interested in it, excited about the potential, scared to say that publicly because a lot of people are just very anti anything to do with AI. So I'm curious, what kind of responses are you getting from people who know that you're working with AI on the creative side, and are they different publicly versus private conversations?
I mean, I could talk about it on the development side, and as a producer, I talk with a lot of artists, and they're all basically saying, hell yes, sign me up. I want to play with the stuff that you're playing with. And we're, building LLMs that help with everything from screenwriting to scene generation, and they're fun and dynamic and unusual and surprising when they're used well. Right, because the art of the prompt is something that requires a real understanding of the logic involved. I think the first screenwriting professor that can teach a class on prompting will be really ahead of the curve. Because when you use something like, let's say, Sora or DALL-E or Midjourney, and you give it a very simple prompt, you'll get something that is impressive on the terms you've given it, but also very obviously generative AI. And the more detailed you get with it, the better. One thing I will say on the development side, because I get a lot of pitch decks, is that you can spot a Midjourney image very easily now. So if you're using something to develop a story, you can't just give it a basic log line. You have to think in terms of characters, world, background, and then it becomes more of a sort of collaborative process with the technology.
Like, a lot of people avoid it right now. That is just like the general consensus. They're like, I'm an artist, I'm not going to use it. And my answer to them is, well, don't you want to play around with something that's free? Because also the reality is that these tech companies are running a business. They are looking for how can they monetize this thing, and they're not sure yet. So they're just throwing it out there, and a lot of the abilities that you can play with right now are out there for free. Why not play with it now if it's available to you for free? Like, why not play with it now if one day it's going to be hidden behind a huge enterprise paywall for you to get access to all of the abilities you could do with it, and then it's going to get hidden behind a potential studio who can afford the specific tools or the specific large language models that you're not going to get access to it as an artist. So why not play with it now is always my answer. And then the other part of it is, like, when you're creating a path that no one else can see, you're going to get a lot of people telling you you're crazy, right? You're going to get a lot of people telling you you're not a real artist. You're going to get a lot of people tell you you're not this, you're not that. But the reality is also, a lot of times I talk to people and they're like, yeah, actually, I'm using it all the time. And this is like an Oscar-nominated blah, 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 blah. And they're like, actually, I am playing around with it with my screenwriting. And it's cool. My hope is that we can find the center point as humanity to find the ways we can accept people who are doing that, and also find ways to protect artists. It always has to be a balance.
All right, there was this recently announced partnership between Lionsgate and Runway AI, where they're effectively doing what you just said. They're playing around with it while they can, before everybody else signs on. They were the first studio to publicly say that they're doing this. I've heard that they're all doing it privately. And essentially, Lionsgate is using its own movies to play with Runway AI's tech just to see what it can do. They're not even entirely sure what they're going to do with it yet. And it was all over the news. Everybody was talking about it constantly. And by the time you're done reading a story about it, the tech has changed and there's something else happening. So I'm curious, what has been in the news? What's a recent development that you think is especially significant? There's a lot of noise. What has actually mattered, do you think?
Well, I pay attention to anything that Meta does because they've been so successful over the past decade and change. So I think their announcement that they have a partnership, I say that in quotes, with Blumhouse, and they're doing something somewhat similar to what Lionsgate is doing with Runway. But look, I mean, Meta has changed the way that we've all consumed content and share with one another through Instagram and WhatsApp, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's the one that I'm particularly paying attention to.
I think one of the biggest crises for American cinema in the last 20 odd years is that the middle class of filmmaking, those movies in the $5 to $10 to $20 million range, have been much harder to get made, even with a brilliant script, because the market doesn't really support them. So you're not seeing a lot of great movies that every studio exec could tell you would probably be a masterpiece. And one of the things that this technology is doing is it's changing the value proposition because the price point is going down. On Monday, we're starting production on Harmony's new movie, which is a script he wrote a number of years ago. And we're doing it with motion capture technology, building environments with video game engines. And the reason why that's exciting is because it only requires one location. And I mentioned that not because there's an AI component to this production, but because I think that these conversations about AI are tied to bigger conversations about technology, making it less expensive to do things that creatively can be very exciting and otherwise would not be happening. With respect to Runway, I don't know how many of us in this room have used Runway. I have. It's basically like a 3D green screen. It's video to video. So you take a footage of this room and you can prompt it to change this room into all kinds of different things. But if you told it to change this room into an open field, it would get confused because there's a ceiling in this room. So again, to that intern analogy, which I think is brilliant, I think there's something to this idea of collaborating with tech in a way that allows you to build spaces that otherwise wouldn't be there.
The thing that I'm paying attention to is where the advances in innovation aren't happening, because this whole boom started when OpenAI announced ChatGPT about 2 years ago. And then all these companies and startups poured lots of money into trying to either catch up or leapfrog in front of it. And it's been really interesting that a lot of big companies have succeeded in making things that are always about as good as whatever the leading edge is. So that Google and Anthropic and Meta and OpenAI, they all have their text models and their image models, and some of them have video models, but they're all kind of at the same frontier. And so this tells me that we're not going into a world where there's one generative AI company that's just so far ahead that everybody has to license from them. But we're also not going to head down into the world in which everybody and their brother can spin up their own really powerful model, and Lionsgate doesn't even need to partner with a company because a couple of people in their IT department could build these tools. So it says to me that there's probably going to be a moderate number of substantial players who can provide really high-quality AI tools. And it's going to be a situation in which there are a lot of strategic deals with them, a lot of choices about, are we building using this pipeline or that pipeline? And it becomes a part of the conversation about production processes that probably happens sort of early on and during development.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump off that point. So, of course, OpenAI CEO is going to get on a big public news television and tell you how amazing OpenAI's products are going to be in the next 5 years, and it's going to freak you out. He's trying to sell his VCs. He's trying to make sure everyone knows OpenAI is the person you should trust to make this thing the best thing possible. So the reality is like once you get in and start playing with it, you'll realize you're like, oh, is this me going to a boutique restaurant and getting a really nice, flavorful burger? Or is this me going down the street to Burger King and ordering a regular burger and I'm eating a regular burger? The reality is a lot of these Gen AI platforms are regular burgers. Like 1 in 100 of these generations is going to be a really flavorful boutique burger. Now, how do we usually get a flavorful boutique burger? We put an amazing group of people together to make amazing work together, right? So also we have to remember we're not replicating the human-to-human process to the highest quality. We're replicating a McDonald's version of the human-to-human process, because if you take the lid off the technology, it's literally pushing pixels together. It's not thinking about the picture holistically like a person does. It's not approaching it like somebody I'm collaborating with. It's literally approaching it literally. Oh, you want dog running across field. I'm going to put a pixel where I think the dog should run. I'm going to put a pixel where I think the field should run. So in that sense, the technology itself is like crafting a high energy system. So a high energy system on the back end. So the thing I'm concerned about, not to bring the energy down, but literal energy, is that because of generative AI and because of this sudden interest in it, the companies that we're talking about feel the need to create more data centers to run these systems because they take up a lot of energy and a lot of data. And so the thing I'm a little worried about is, we're trying to move backwards on coal-centered data systems. We're trying to move backwards on kind of energy outputs, and we don't have a good idea of how to change the climate, and I totally understand that. But on the other hand, this is pushing us back into using energy very carelessly. And I think it's important we can't have a conversation about how great this tech is without talking about how it impacts our physical world. And I, as an artist, I'm just wrestling with the fact that that's just the reality that we live in today. My iPhone isn't fully recyclable. So I should tell Apple to make it fully recyclable? Yes, but also when is that going to happen? Same thing with AI, but it's important that people know when they play with this technology, they are also adding to the cost of energy in the physical environment and not just in the digital world they get to play in.
I'm actually surprised more people don't bring that up because, Hollywood is already reticent about Gen AI tech. And then when you bring in that there are also environmental concerns because of the amount of energy that these data centers require, I kind of am a little bit amazed that Hollywood hasn't jumped all over that as like part of their anti-AI pitch.
But because I think that Hollywood knows they need just generally data centers to run the systems they're running today. You can't make a Marvel film without hundreds and hundreds of data centers because everyone's using the CG technology that needs a high amount of output, terabytes and terabytes of data. So they know they're already bought into the system. They know they're already bought into using a ton of energy.
So one of the other big concerns about generative AI revolves around intellectual property rights. And there are concerns on both the input side and the output side. So literally the materials you are inputting into these models, whether that's existing scripts or existing video or music, and then the thing that comes out on the other side. They're very different concerns for people who are using Gen AI. Currently, only humans can register works for copyright. And so the thinking so far is you can't really copyright anything that was created by AI, but if it required a human to enter it, how much work did the human do versus how much work did the AI do? Like, it's very fuzzy, gray area mess. The input side is a little bit clearer, but only a little bit. So I'm curious what you guys are thinking, feeling about the IP implications of this tech.
So I think on the output side, with the things that come out of generative AI, the best analogy that I have seen is to photography, where for the first few decades after photography was invented, the courts had real difficulty conceiving of a photograph as something that could be copyrighted. And then they realized that photographers actually are creative. And I think the same thing is going to happen with generative AI. If I just say rainbow unicorn to Midjourney, I'm fine. Whatever it comes back is 99.9% Midjourney and 0.001% me. But as people put more work into prompting and crafting and developing a particular artistic vision, it's going to be pretty obvious that the AI is a tool in the same general kind of way that a camera is a tool. And of course, we'll recognize those human creations as being the work of humans who would be entitled to copyright on the same terms as people who write using tools we call typewriters or computers or paintbrushes. I actually think that the input side is going to be much thornier because that's not just about what is creativity, but it's about what is the balance of power and economic relations among multiple very important human industries. How are we going to relate the human creators whose works are being used to train AIs and the immense amount of creative effort they've put in their careers to the human creators or human innovators who have made generative AIs and the immense amount of research and development that they've put in to build these technologies. And that's not a question that has an answer just sitting in terms of you can reason logically about what the answer is knowing about copyright law. It's also a policy choice.
We're seeing this play out particularly around digital news. So I had a dinner with the New York Times at the Consumer Electronics Show earlier this year, 5 days before the dinner with all executives. The New York Times sued OpenAI. That was a fun way to host a dinner. Perplexity is being sued by almost 10 different publications at this point. Skip the link is kind of their mantra. There is real concern that's happening around intellectual property on all formats, in news articles, photography, video, audio, et cetera. And I think that we haven't quite come to terms as a society yet of the implications of all this. And I think a lot is riding on our future leaders, our future political leaders. Are policies going to be enforced to crack down on this, or is it going to be, are we going to fuel the fire and try to develop more and more quickly before the regulation is in place? So super interesting time. And I think we can't also underplay the amount of money that's being invested in this space from Silicon Valley. It's a race between the US and other parts of the world as well, and who can develop the fastest. So lots to play out, but it is a concern to a lot of folks.
Yeah, I think the reality of this is that when you were a part of the internet age, and we still are, but I'm just saying you were as in you yesterday, and you were posting on Instagram and Facebook, and you were, on your Blogger and your MySpace, you never thought that one day all of that data was going to be fed into a generative machine that could then output a version of yourself to somebody, But the reality is that is what happened. Like, you checked those boxes by saying, I agree to these terms and conditions, and you put all your stuff out on this kind of public web space. Some of it is private, depending on where you put it, but some of it is public, and then the big tech says, well, we got to feed this machine a ton of data, so let's just, like Pac-Man, get every single dot we possibly can. And then the reality is that Pac-Man has run out of dots. The tech companies have literally come out and be like, we have fed this thing everything we possibly can that doesn't sit behind a private screen on the internet, right? They have ran out of data to feed this thing. And that is why these partnerships with Lionsgate or these partnerships with artists are super valuable to the tech companies, because for them, some of them really value pure data. They value data that is pure from humans because they don't want the data that the AI is consuming to be data that the AI created. But the reality is like, this is also creating a new form of marketplace salesmanship, where yes, we need to all play nice, I agree, and yes, the government will catch up, I all agree, but also, can now your data be sold? And the answer is probably yes. And not just in the bad way we talk about, like your data as in your social security number, but the data as in the script you made that you've been waiting to get funded and you can't get it funded, but maybe one day you can say, hey, yes, feed my script to your Pac-Man and give me the $20,000 I need to go make my script a real film. That could be a real relationship that starts to happen. We're seeing it at the studio level, but why not at the creator level? If you're an artist and you're like, oh man, I can't make rent this month just doing illustrations, here's a stack of pure illustrations. I'm gonna sell it to this LLM because it needs more data to feed it. It is just a constant Pac-Man machine. So that is, I think, not a bad thing when we're thinking about, the legalities around this, is the fact that some of the stuff needs to get protected. So we need social media platforms where people can't go and just data scrape everything. I think that's going to be started to be created. We're also going to need places that you feel like you can share your stuff without it getting scraped. But we're also going to see, oh, take it, scrape it, do it. That's an old script I've had sitting in my closet for years. If I can make a couple $1,000 on it, great. And I think that's also a positive thing.
I mean, those are the magic words that everyone keeps saying: consent and compensation. Do you think that is sort of a potential baby step toward the industry at large being more accepting of it? If there were some creators, so say James Cameron was like, here, take everything I've ever done that I have the rights to give to you and have at it.
I think so. Absolutely. I can't tell you if it's like perfect, but I think that's a huge part of why people feel violated, right? I spent 8 years of my life in a master's program and a PhD program to perfect my illustration. I spent $200,000 and I'm in debt and I make illustrations. And now suddenly this AI thing can just make you an illustration in 2 seconds. Of course you're upset. Of course you're frustrated. But what if someone said, well, we love your illustrations. Let's pay you $80,000 to train this LLM. I think that could assuage some people's frustrations with this. I think also a lot of people in Hollywood are trying to get to retirement. There's a lot of people out there who know one thing, and this is an old system and an old model, but they're in the union and they're like, all I do is light and grip, and all I do is this and this, and suddenly an AI machine just come in and do that for me, and I'm not going to get to retirement. There are people who feel that way. Scarcity is a thing because they don't feel taken care of. So I do think it could edge the conversation, but will it change it? I couldn't tell you.
Last night at Montclair Film, we had a YouTube creator, Michelle Carre. She introduced her full-length feature, Challenge Accepted. And the conversation, the panel afterward, we discussed that the revenue split was 55% to her, 45% to YouTube. And that's what keeps her on the platform. So that is irrespective of AI, but it's a model that's being used by creators today, and not just on Google, YouTube, but also TikTok and others. I think you're going to see more of this in the AI world. I think the question becomes on a platform like X, where you're uploading a ton of information and that could be used to train the models, your personal information, and even thinking about it from a content perspective. If you're at a concert and you have a video of Taylor Swift and you're putting that on X, just thinking you're sharing it with your friends, how is that being trained? How is that being used? So I think that's going to be a discussion that plays out in mass.
I also think we shouldn't restrict these conversations to the film space, because there's 3 billion people out there playing video games, and the gaming industry has been reckoning with these questions for a much longer period of time. And I'm not saying they have easy answers, but mods are a big thing, right? Big open world games where gamers come in and they're fans and they build their own versions of them. They put out a special adventure that you can play in that world of that game. You know, Fallout is a great example. There's so many Fallout mods out there. And they're doing it because they're fans, but they also work out a deal with the game studio that allows them to sell it. If the game studio basically said, you can't do that, that's our IP, they would be alienating a huge portion of the fan base that wants to engage more with that IP. So it's in their interest to work out a relationship there, and I think the film industry is going to have to be open to this as well.
When it comes to AI, what kind of guardrails would you like to see, or do you think are most necessary in order for Hollywood, using the broad term, to be able to use this tech responsibly?
I mean, I'm not afraid to answer that question. I just don't know, right? I mean, I think that the strikes of the past year and change showed us that nobody really knows what the guardrails are, because the tech is so fragmented and misunderstood. Obviously, I think that, you know, people should be paid for their work. People should be able to protect their likenesses. They should be able to track the use of their IP as much as possible. And so an element of transparency would help with that process, and maybe we will work our way towards some greater regulation around that. But it's really hard to know.
I think it's very hard to say what guardrails are going to work if you're thinking about what a model will or won't do. One reason is that you can't really tell from the prompt or even the output whether the use somebody is going to make of it is going to be legitimate or really harmful. That the same exact prompt and same exact video clip could be perfectly innocuous illustrations for a fictional movie project, or it could be used for election disinformation to show something completely not made up as presented as fact. And the clip would be the same clip. It's just the context of how it gets posted online. There's no way we can ask the AI companies to implement technical filters that will be able to figure out whether it is one of your productions or something being used as a piece of character assassination. And so the fact that all the traditional laws and social norms that we've got, they're going to have to still apply. We're never going to be in a situation where you can just say, well, I got this out of the AI, so therefore I'm safe, I'm fine. You're going to have to always ask, is this AI-generated actor suspiciously similar looking to a famous celebrity? You might have to think about that in the same way if you cast somebody. Like, you're going to be thinking about all of the same kinds of issues, and you're going to have to be using the same kind of judgment and legal filters as you would, for any contractor or any artist who hands in some creative work. You're going to be asking questions about, where does this come from? What does it look like? What are we implying by publishing this? In some ways, the job of media lawyers is going to be a lot like the job of media lawyers has always been.
I think you can't say it just as Hollywood. I think that was stated. Like, it's this idea of AI is not just around content creation. It literally exists like everywhere around you. We're talking about, AI being used in HR. We're talking about AI being used in policing. We're talking about AI being used in your day-to-day life for you to be able to have a paralegal on your staff. I think it was less than 50 years ago, everyone would be chain smoking cigarettes just nonstop because that was just what everyone was doing, right? We were just hanging out, smoking cigarettes. Like, it's all good. Like, you need one, I got one. And like, the reality is, we as humans, we're like, this is really dangerous. This is really bad. We're getting lung cancer. We're dying. Why don't we adjust our policies, our thought process, our marketing, our storytelling, our narratives, and let's band together and say, maybe smoking shouldn't be so widely accepted. And so I think we can do the same thing with AI. We can find the balance. We can find a way forward. But I don't think it's going to come without, yes, the cost of people's jobs. Yes, the cost of people's livelihoods. Yes, the cost of everything that comes when you have a revolution. And at one point, we're going to get to the other side and feel a little more well-balanced.
All right. And just quickly before we go to audience questions, looking ahead for people who want to play with this tech before it gets put behind that expensive paywall we were discussing, is there anything that you feel like is especially promising, that if you had to suggest one, I'm asking you to pick a favorite child here, if you had to suggest one program for people to go explore, what would it be?
I mean, I'll go back to Runway, because what I've seen with Runway is that there's so much you can do with it on the basis of existing footage, and we all have a camera in our pocket now. Everybody's very comfortable as their own videographer, essentially. And from a filmmaking standpoint, it's very exciting. So learning how to use tech like that is incredibly valuable. I also think using Midjourney or DALL-E, image generation, being more sophisticated in terms of how you approach it can be an amazing portal to kinds of creativity that wouldn't be available to you if you only used it in a very superficial way. So just more generally, just spending time with the tech that's publicly available and learning how to push it to past whatever the immediate limits seem to be.
I'm going to do a very fast two. The first is OpenAI. Ask it to roast yourself. Give yourself a roast. I did that after a film on Thursday night at the festival. Quite interesting. The second, I would say, is one of my portfolio companies called Bling AI. So it's 8 former Disney Imagineers and a Cirque du Soleil executive that have designed a company for digital custom jewelry and luxury accessories. And you can take a sketch to a finished product in 8 seconds, which normally would take 3 to 4 weeks. So BLNG AI.
So my examples are very basic, very entry level, but Midjourney or DALL-E are great for just getting started making images, because you can put in a very short prompt. Like with my kids, we did an oil painting of an otter on the first day of high school. And you get back something interesting. And then you're like, okay, just say to yourself, how would I like to change this? And try to shape the prompt to get something more like what you have in your head. And that practice of going back and forth and seeing how it changes really teaches you a lot more about how AI really works than reading lots of pieces about it. That hands-on experience is great.
Yeah, and I think right now we're talking about something called AI literacy. Like, I think think about it like this is a new language, like tech literacy, using your computer, using your mobile device. Think of it as like, oh, I'm just teaching myself AI literacy, because this is a very important part of how we're living our life on today. And you might not feel touched by it, but in 2 years you might. So brush up on your AI literacy. And I think the best way to do that, and this is not what everyone else said, is Google Workspace's Gemini. Because Google Workspace's Gemini, like if you use Google Docs, you use Google Sheets, you use Gmail, perfect. You know what those systems are, especially if you're trying to run a business. Because how I use it, I almost like don't use it as much for creativity as much as I say, hey, I'm creating a new course and I want to know what audience I should be marketing this to. Here's the name of the course. Here's what I want to do with it. And I use it as like a business partner. And the Gemini Workspace is so great because it just gets integrated into like the system you might already be using, whether it's like, hey, I need a content strategy on Google Sheets, like perfectly laid out. It'll be like, here's my first pass. And it's not perfect, but then you play around with it. Or you have a Google slide. You're like, can you give me a template slide for me trying to show a timeline? Boom, there's your template slide. So like, I'm trying to use AI to like get rid of some of the monotonous stuff in my day-to-day life, because that's what we were all promised. And so I kind of like using that promise and making it easier for myself as like an entrepreneur, as an independent businesswoman, to try to be like, all right, I didn't go to school for business, but maybe this Google Workspace for Gemini thing can like help me automate my business, and then I can go and create and do amazing things with friends. And then when we want to collaborate on something, but we have a small budget, then we open up Sora, or then we open up Dolly. It's not this like day-to-day thing I open up and play with every day, because it just doesn't feel great for me as a creative. I prefer to like try and do other things before I create with AI.
Awesome. Thank you all. All right. Do we have any questions?
Yes. What do you see as the future of copyright and with the use of AI, and also the challenge of understanding exactly the source data that AI uses when it does things?
Well, Google just came out with a watermarking tool, which is, I think, a big step, certainly for photorealistic content. But I mentioned the lawsuits that are ongoing with OpenAI and Perplexity in particular. You're going to see a lot of conversation about this in the next couple of months. I think that there needs to be a come to Jesus moment where there's either a payment that's made to these companies in exchange for that content, or there'll be a cease and desist that they won't be able to use this content. But I would look at what happens in particular with OpenAI. And for everybody, I would look at OpenAI as a really interesting model, for-profit, non-profit, Sam Altman, all the other investments that he has going on. But with respect to this copyright issue in particular, watch that New York Times OpenAI lawsuit, because I think it'll be a bellwether for what happens in the broader industry.
Janice?
So maybe this is a question for everybody, but maybe I'll start with James. So it was just discussed how the Ellisons bought Paramount basically, and like this was a company with a massive amount of debt, and no one else wanted it essentially. And so you have Disney and Warner Brothers that have just tens of billions of dollars of debt. Do you see any of these AI companies potentially ever coming in and owning a studio, and would it have value to them? And would it pass regulation?
Oh, that's wild. I mean, I can see why there are distribution companies, why Spotify and Netflix decided, oh, we have to get into the creative business and not just getting stuff out to people. I mean, it really feels like AI needs creativity both for training data, and the other reason would be like the biggest acqui-hire in the entire history of the world. Just get a lot of creative people to teach all of our business and tech people what people actually want out of tools for creativity.
I think there's an advertising component that's critical to the future proliferation of AI. So you'll see Perplexity will introduce one this fall. OpenAI is making aggressive moves into that space, and every one of these major tech companies has advertising is its primary or close to primary revenue stream. So I think it probably would be more in that direction in terms of what ultimately happens. But I think it's a question of hardware, software, and services coming together. And I think it's more likely that a Microsoft or an Amazon or whatever that has made an aggressive move into live content as well as library acquisitions than it would be for a Disney or a Warner to make a play. And frankly, I think a lot of these AI companies are going to go away. I think that the mid-tier companies that have raised 500 mil, there's no exit for them right now. So I think that there'll be fewer of the bigger ones that actually could acquire a studio, but I think the technology companies definitely could.
This is a broader question about AI, and maybe you can all speak to the rapid rate of evolution of AI systems that are self-modifying to a point potentially leaving humans behind. And this relates to the fundamental AI of friendly systems versus getting to artificial superintelligence.
Well, I think that's what's really interesting about the creation of these tools. I have a lot of conversations with very smart people in Silicon Valley, and a lot of them kind of realize they created the system that's going to end their jobs. This is especially true, I think, less for creative work in the Hollywood industry. I know we're talking about that focus, but we're actually, I think, the Silicon Valley industry, because now these things can write apps, these things can update code, these things can push out an update for a website like American Express with all these like 7 junior soft middle of the tier engineers who are usually working on those updates all day long. So what I've talked to some people, and they basically the forecast they've seen is very similar to how farmland, right, used to need like a farmer with a big load of laborers to work that farmland, and now a lot of that has been totally cleared out because you can have robots work the farmland, and all you need now is very high level smart people to fix a robot or code or engineer the robot that tells you what the weather's going to be or how much water you need for your farmland. Tech companies are seeing that now happen with AI because they've made an AI that's so good that they don't need all these people laboring over the land. They don't need all these people laboring over every line of code. They can literally automate it. And we're also going to see a huge jump in the actual creation of like non-coded products. So if you wanted to create your own Uber app, you don't need an army of Silicon Valley engineers. You can literally use a non-coded product that literally you tell it, very similar to what Gen AI is doing for creativity, but now with tech, you tell it, I want to create an app that I can publish to the iPhone store that does this, this, and this, and I want the color to be this, and I want the UX to be this, and it'll give it to you because it can automate that system now. So it's not just a process of seeing the Hollywood industry get changed. This is now a process that the Silicon Valley industry is also going to get drastically changed.
My point, though, was the rate of evolution is ever increasing faster than we've seen anything happen. And it's really hard for humans to keep up with it. And it's not just, you don't have to be knowledgeable of AI, it's just the AI systems will leave us in the dust.
It's not a bad thing, though. I mean, I will say I had a fascinating conversation. Yeah, well, let's see. But I had a wonderful dinner a couple months ago with this Thai filmmaker, Apichatpong Weerasethakul, who made Uncle Boonmi and many other amazing movies. One of the most acclaimed filmmakers on the planet. And we were talking about AI because he did a piece called Conversations with the Sun that was a collaborative work with ChatGPT. And he said, maybe we're too precious about human intelligence. Maybe there are certain things that we've been taking for granted because that's all we have at our disposal. And if we open ourselves up to the way in which this technology is absorbing new aspects of who we are and taking us in other directions, we will be satisfied with those results. Now, that sounds like a very radical concept, but that's also because we're in the midst of this radical change. So I'm not saying that I necessarily endorse that idea. I think human intelligence and our autonomy should be protected. But I also think that there are certain things that are scary for us to hear that are also ultimately just the nature of change.
All right. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, Michaela, James, Greg, Eric, for being on our panel.